Today we're going to be focusing on culture in the 1930s during the Great Depression and how the Great Depression influenced the culture during the time period. Movies at the time were a big hit. About 65% of the population were going to movies once a week. Many of them were going to look at escapist programming, basically, movies that were able to get them away from their everyday troubles. Gone with the Wind was one of these films that were extremely popular at the time. It was perhaps the most famous film of the era. Many musicals and comedies also were extremely popular at that time. 90% of the households had radio. Many families listened together every day. Keep in mind that televisions weren't popular in the households until the 1950s, so this was one of the famous forms of entertainment during the time. Dramas, variety shows, plays, um, soap operas for homemakers. Soap operas, the reason why they call them soap operas, they're basically, when you think of soap operas today, we think of maybe Young and the Restless, Bold and Beautiful, Guiding Light, All My Children, those types of things. Well, during that time, it was a lot of the same drama, but they were called soap operas because of the people who paid for it. The paid advertisements were usually people who sold soap. They were soap companies, and so soap operas become extremely popular in the 1930s. Children's shows that were after school hours and immediate news coverage became customary. Now people have a better way to communicate. If you think about how easy it is to communicate these days with smartphones and so forth, people didn't have that luxury at the time. So radios were the centerpiece in many ways of the home. Artists, they started to decorate. For America, Federal Art Project would pay artists to make art. The federal government, it was just another way for them to pump more money into the economy. Murals typically portray dignity of ordinary people at work. Grant Wood was one of the most famous artists of the time period. The Federal Theater Project would hire art actors and artists and in any way really that the government could pay people for showing off their talents. And also, when people got this money, they'd put that money right back into the economy. As far as the diverse writers projects of American life, the Native Son was one of those projects. John Steinbeck and the Grapes of Wrath, which talked about the conditions of the Dust Bowl and how one family moved to Oklahoma, or I'm sorry, moved to California. And many of these people, whether they're from Oklahoma or not, were referred to as Okies. They got that nickname simply because a large population were coming from Oklahoma and the areas around it. Some writers, they examined the difficulties of the 1930s, and others, they showed ordinary people and values of small town life. Next week, we're going to evaluate the impact of overall the New Deal, and not just culture, but the different groups, and also FDR's efforts to help all those different groups.